Welcome to video number 1 for Chapter 17, Manifest Destiny and Its Legacy. The Accession of Tyler II. The Whig Party had chosen William Henry Harrison as a candidate, and he was elected in 1841, and John Tyler was elected his vice president. His cabinet included Secretary of State Daniel Webster of Webster Dictionary fame, and Henry Clay in the Senate, who was the uncrowned king of the Whigs. William Henry Harrison contracted pneumonia and died after only 4 weeks in office. He stood outside in the cold of the winter and gave the longest inauguration speech in history, 2 hours and 20 minutes, without a coat on, and he got sick and died. Moral of the story, always wear your coat. John Tyler was not a popular Whig. He was part of the Whig ticket, and now he was in the spotlight because he became the president. He stubbornly was attached to principles, and he had earlier resigned from the Senate rather than accept the distasteful instructions from the Virginia legislature. He left the Jacksonian Democrats for the Whigs, and enemies accused him of being a Democrat in Whig clothing. Tyler was at odds with the majority of his Whig party. The Whig Party platform was pro-bank, pro-protective tariff, and pro-internal improvements, like building roads and bridges. Tyler, too, rhymed with Tippecanoe, but there the harmony ended. Harrison, the Whig, had served only 4 weeks, whereas Tyler, the ex-Democrat, but largely still a Democrat at heart, served for 204 weeks. The Whig platform outlined a strongly nationalist program, and financial reform came first. The Whig Congress passed the law ending the independent treasury system. President Tyler, disarmingly agreeable, signed it. Henry Clay drove through Congress a bill for a fiscal bank, which would create a new Bank of the United States. And Henry Clay, known as the Great Compromiser, would have done well to appease Tyler. Tyler vetoed the bill on both practical and constitutional grounds, but Whig leaders tried again, passing another bill providing for a fiscal corporation, which Tyler again vetoed, and Democrats, the whole time that this was going on, were happy to see the Whig Party having trouble with the new president. Whig extremists condemned Tyler as his accidency and also called him an executive ASS. He was formally expelled from the party, and his entire cabinet resigned, except for Secretary of State Webster, who was then in the midst of delicate negotiations with England. The proposed Whig tariff was also vetoed by Tyler. He disagreed with the Whig scheme for distributing to states revenue from the sale of public lands in the West, and he believed that this would squander federal money. So the chastened Clayites redrafted the tariff bill, removed the dollar distribution scheme, and lowered the rates to moderately protective levels of 1832, roughly 32% on dutiable goods, and Tyler reluctantly signed the tariff of 1842. During this time period, there was a war of words with Great Britain, and there were many anti-British passions in the United States. At the bottom lay the bitter memories of 2 wars with Great Britain. The pro-British Federalists had already died out, but British travelers still had a negative taste in their mouth about American customs, and they wrote negatively about them in books. These writings touched off what's sometimes called a third war with England, but this war was basically spilled out just with each side writing negative things about each other rather than becoming violent. This is a British cartoon that reflects their view of American culture, politics, and diplomacy during this time period. America was a borrowing nation during this time period, needing money to build expensive canals and railroads. And Great Britain, with overflowing coffers, was a lending nation during this time period. But during the Panic of 1837, several states defaulted on bonds or didn't pay them altogether. So in 1837, there was a short-lived insurrection that erupted in Canada. Americans furnished military supplies or volunteered for armed service to go up and engage in the conflict. But Washington basically remained neutral. But it could not enforce unpopular laws in the face of popular opposition. So the provocative incident on the Canadian frontier brought passions to boil in 1837, when the American steamer that called the Caroline was carrying supplies to insurgents across the Niagara River. They were attacked by the British and set on fire, and the craft sank, but one American was killed. This was an unlawful invasion of American soil, and this would be having repercussions. In 1840, a man called McLeod, who confessed to being involved in the Caroline raid, was arrested and indicted for murder. And London made it clear that if he was executed, they would want to go to war with the United States again. Fortunately, McLeod was freed after establishing his alibi. But these tensions were renewed in 1841 as well, when British officials in the Bahamas offered asylum to 130 Virginian slaves who had rebelled and captured the American ship the Creole. Britain had abolished slavery within its empire in 1833, raising Southern fears that its Caribbean possessions would become Canada-like havens for escaped slaves. There were also boundary disputes involving Maine during this time period. The St. Lawrence River was full of ice several months of the year, and the British needed to be able to continue their trade. So as a defensive precaution, they wanted to build a road west from the seaport of Halifax to Quebec to make movement of trade easier. And the road, though, that they wanted to build was to go through a disputed territory claimed by Maine. Britain sent to Washington a non-professional diplomat named Lord Ashburn, who established cordial relations with Secretary Webster. They agreed to compromise on the Maine boundary, and they agreed on a split-the-difference arrangement, which means the Americans retained 7,000 square miles of the 12,000 square miles of wilderness in dispute, but the British got less land but won the desired Halifax-Quebec route. And you can see the proposed road route is in blue, the blue line here, and the Webster-Ashburn Treaty line is in orange. So you can see the area in orange that was given up by the United States, and then the area in bluish, greenish that was acquired by the United States. And we'll continue to talk about manifest destiny and these issues in our classroom lessons.